Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and today we're looking at the T56 Magnum for the 0304 Cobra or New Edge, the TUET11010, and what we're going to be looking at is the pivot ball stud length and also the clutch fork clearancing. So in the video we're going to talk about the stock clutch fork and how it sits on the transmission, and then some notching that we did in order to help with clearance with the extra webbing that the T56 Magnum has. So you can see it's a little bit thicker in some spots, and it has been factory notched, but we'll see if that's enough. So why do we have to do this? Well, if you look at the distance between the stock clutch and the bell housing, that distance shortens when you go to a twin disc or a bigger clutch. So it really depends on which clutch you have. So what that means is we might have to move our throwout bearing assembly back 5 millimeters, or it could be contacting the diaphragm fingers before the transmission's even fully in place. Some people have gone to install the transmission and that throwout bearing already is smashing against those diaphragm fingers. So if the throwout bearing is already touching the diaphragm fingers, it doesn't matter how much adjustability you have in the firewall adjuster or your clutch quadrant. So this is something that has to be addressed. So stock, we have about 25 millimeters of space from the retainer sleeve to the throwout bearing. After we've done all the notching, we've gained about 5 millimeters doing that. So notching the clutch fork is one option to get that throwout bearing farther away from the diaphragm fingers so it's not already hitting when the transmission's installed. Now the pivot ball stud is another way that we can do that by shortening it, and it changes the swing on how the clutch fork is going to swing with that too. Luckily, both the Magnum and the stock T56 that I see are both 30 millimeters in depth on how far they've been drilled. So switching over to the McLeod adjustable pivot ball stud should be able to get us that 5 millimeters as well. The part number we used was 16912 on the stock T56. By swapping to the adjustable pivot ball stud from McLeod, you can see it comes in naturally a little bit shorter, actually almost that exact space of 5 millimeters that we needed. So we'll go ahead and get started and show you the process of doing both. So keep in mind again, it depends on which clutch you have, how far it comes out. So you're going to need to be doing your measurements so that you know how far your clutch is coming out, if you have a twin disc, if you have a single disc, how thick that ends up being. Also the flywheel and its thickness. Sometimes there's adapter plates for McLeod, so you use your stock flywheel, and that might even affect the thickness. So you're going to have to do your measurements and see where it's contacting. Now I had an old clutch fork, so I decided to cut it up and just see what it looks like as testing, but make sure you're wearing proper safety equipment, glasses, and coverings for this. Okay, so here's what the notching looked like when it was all said and done. Now, first of all, this dampener, as you can see, we had to even notch it more. So rather than grind it all down, in the end, we just had this removed. Now you can put this piece on and off of the car with the transmission installed, so that makes it nice to at least do that if you have to. But we had to go down even deeper. So this is what the notching looked like to get across that webbing that's on the front of the transmission on the Magnum on both sides compared to a stock one. So you can see it's quite a significant amount. Now hopefully you might not have to do this at all if you change to the adjustable pivot ball stud. Okay, this is the McLeod part number that we've already covered. Okay, if you change to that one and it already does what you need to get your extra 5 millimeters shorter, and that works with your twin disc clutch and everything that you're using, you may not have to do this. But you might have to do this, and the pivot ball stud might have to be a combination of both. It really just depends on what clutch and flywheel you have, and there's a lot of variables, so there's no short answer. But again, you can try notching this one out and have it removed, but it is nice to have this dampener to give it a little bit more structural integrity. You don't want this clutch fork bending or twisting. But anyway, that's what the notching might look like. And so you might want to consider notching it out, and then that way when it's all on the car, at least it's already notched. You may not need it notched, but it's better to have it than have to pull the transmission again when you find out that it's that you need that extra clearance. But if you do your measurements, you should be okay. So simply put, deeper clutch makes it so that that throwout bearing has to go back farther, And with that said, it has to be with the shortening of the pivot ball stud and or notching that clutch fork to get that throwout bearing back, so you're not already smacking your throwout bearing against the diaphragm fingers as you're trying to. Now, by comparison with the T56 Magnum, the distance with the stock pivot ball is that 48 millimeters. So right now, as it sits, even with the little notching, which we'll show you later in the video, we could barely get it to where it would be touching the diaphragm fingers of the clutch as it's installed. So we will need to use that adjustable pivot ball stud to gain some room and notch it possibly. Okay, T56 Magnum with a stock clutch fork. They have made some provisions, it looks like, where they've notched it out for the clutch fork to go back a little bit more. Note where it appears that they have notched it from the factory for that clutch fork here and here. So we're gonna get some measurements of what that's like stock, and then also how we have notched this out to go past some of this webbing and go in a little bit farther. So it looks like we're right about 25 millimeters for this depth here from the retainer sleeve to the throwout bearing. Okay, we were able to increase that up to 30 from 25 with notching the clutch fork. Now, using McLeod's adjustable pivot ball stud, if it works like it did on the other car, that alone would give us about 5 millimeters difference, or 6, so you may not even have to notch it, or maybe a combination of two, being that the T56 Magnum does have thicker webbing. All right, still playing with Play-Doh even at this age, I guess. We're gonna put it on the back side here and see where our contact is made. Go ahead and put our clutch fork back on. Okay, so now give it a little bit of a contact here. Okay, so if we wanted full travel out of this, to go a little bit more, we can see hitting the bolt here too on the top. It's hitting right about here on the webbing. Okay, so here's the impressions that were made from the bolt there. And also you can see on the webbing, those directions, both of those. So it's basically just the webbing here and that top bolt. Okay, so now I'm gonna take this knife here and I'm gonna cut and leave behind where these marks are so that we have it exposed everywhere it's not, and then we can kind of make some marks on the back of the clutch fork. Okay, so I'm just gonna cut with a razor and remove everywhere except for where it made contact. Okay, so this is what the clutch fork looks like. We'll want to clearance it here, coming down on that angle there, on this side back there, and here, so we can mark this with a Sharpie. And this thing here, and you might just say, well, just take this whole thing out. And maybe you can, but that's gonna give you some structure problems. We don't want this fork to bend. Okay, so we basically just kind of put paint around the Play-Doh, so when we remove the Play-Doh, we'll know the area to cut. Okay, so basically as we remove this, we're gonna wanna kind of cut right from there to there. We're gonna wanna cut from here to here. We're gonna clearance between those two. Okay, and then we can draw a circle on this one too. Okay, and we just cut around this, and so that's kind of our area to cut that with maybe like a hole saw or something. Okay, 13 millimeter socket here. Okay, and we're just gonna take this off and we're gonna drill it out right there. Okay, so this is what we kind of want to drill out. This is a hole saw, so it has a drill bit in the end of it to help pilot it. And then it's gonna basically drill down in a circle. So if you want to see more on how that works, I'll put a video in the description where you can get these, but we're going to go ahead. We have safety glasses on, and we're going to just start drilling. Okay, as you can see, it's already drilling very easily. It's pretty soft metal.
You have a lady that's not a lady, okay?
Okay, just used one of these bits here to kind of smooth it out just so that it looks a little more uniform. We can clean it up more too after we test fit. Okay, another note on clearancing, even when you're taking this off of the backside here and you're cutting it so it's not hitting the webbing anywhere here, you're always going to be hitting a high point. So you'll grind it down, and then when you put this here, you might be hitting here, so you grind that down. Then the next thing you know, that's making a hit here or the other side. So just know that about the clearancing. You can see what this ended up looking like to get it to miss all the webbing, to miss those bolts, and get it really far back. So stock, we have about 25 millimeters of space from the retainer sleeve to the throwout bearing. After we've done all the notching, we've gained about 5 millimeters doing that. So notching the clutch fork is one option to get that throwout bearing farther away from the diaphragm fingers so it's not already hitting when the transmission's installed. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Check the video description where I have other videos on setting the pivot ball stud length and everything. But as you'll see here, a lot of this notching may or may not have to be done. It just depends on which clutch you have. You can remove and install that other piece while the transmission's installed, so that's nice. You can make adjustments later. But some of these other cuts, you might just consider making something like this where it's touching so that when everything's installed, if you have run out of room, you have that option already where it's pre-cut. So just something to consider. We'll be moving the adjustable pivot ball stud over, and I think that combined with a little bit of notching, we should not have any problems whatsoever. So anyway, stay tuned. Check the video description for other videos that are similar to this, and if you're new to the channel, please feel free to subscribe. Thanks, guys.